Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the Mana Fix. Now I know it's been a while since you guys have seen me. I apologize for that. I don't have a great excuse, but what matters now is I'm here and I'm going to give you guys as much content as I can going forward, given the fact that I work a 40-hour work week. So today's deck is actually a budget deck tech I built on a budget of $80. This is another one from the Commander Legends set, and it's one that I think gets often overlooked. This is Lathiel, the Bounteous Dawn. Lathiel is a legendary unicorn for 1 green, 1 white, and 2 other. It's a 2/2 with lifelink, and it says at the beginning of each end step, if you gained life this turn, distribute up to that many +1/+1 counters among other creatures. Now, I know this seems like not a lot at first, but trust me, this can spiral out of control really fast. Let's take a look. So there's a few things to note about this card. The first is that our +1/+1 counters come at the end step. So if we're gaining life on our turn, we won't be able to power up our creatures until after we attack. However, the other notable thing about this card is that it triggers at each end step. So if we're able to gain life on our opponent's turns, we can power up our creatures before we take our turn. Also, Lathiel has lifelink, so if we can safely deal damage with her, she'll actually be able to trigger her own ability. Even so, we'll want every opportunity to gain life, whether that be on our turn or our opponent's, so that we can beef up our creatures and swing in for lethal damage. We'll kick things off with the ramp cards here. You'll see some recognizable staples here like Cultivate, Rampant Growth, Sakura Tribe Elder, and Wood Elves. These are going to get basic lands from our deck straight into play. We've also got mana dorks like Llanowar Elves and Avacyn's Pilgrim. These each cost 1 and tap for 1, and are also nice because they provide us with extra bodies to target with those +1/+1 counters from Lathiel. Moving on to the more niche cards here, we have Emergent Sequence. This is a newer card from Strixhaven and one that I don't think is getting enough attention. This is basically a rampant growth that turns the land you fetch into a creature. The land comes in as a 0/0 with a +1/+1 counter on it for each land that you had to enter the battlefield this turn. What makes this potentially better than Rampant Growth in this deck is the fact that your land becomes a creature so it can attack and block for you. What makes it potentially worse is that it opens that land up to creature removal or board wipes. I like Emergent Sequence in this deck though because the land is getting counters, which means it has synergy with a number of other cards in our deck. Pristine Talisman is a 3-cost artifact that taps for 1 colorless mana. Whenever we activate that ability, we're going to gain 1 life. Gift of Paradise is a 3-cost aura that enchants a land we control. That enchanted land is going to tap for 2 mana rather than just 1. This enchantment also gains us 3 life when it enters the battlefield. Fertilid is another one of those niche ramp cards. This enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and then we can pay 2 mana and remove a +1/+1 counter from it to get a basic land from our deck onto the battlefield. We can even add +1/+1 counters to this with our commander in order to activate that ability even more. Gyre Sage is another one that makes use of +1/+1 counters. Playing creatures while this is out is going to add +1/+1 counters to it. Its activated ability adds an amount of green mana equal to the number of counters on it. Again, this is one we might want to target with Lathiel to increase our mana output. Accomplished Alchemist is one of the more powerful ramp cards in the deck. We can either tap this creature for 1 mana of any color, or X mana of any 1 color, where X is the amount of life we've gained this turn. This deck is going to be gaining us life all the time, so we should be able to activate that second ability for quite a bit of mana. Last for this category, we have Hamza, Guardian of Aershin. Whether or not this is considered ramp is up for debate, but I like it here because it helps us more easily cast our creature spells. This is 6 mana, but can cost as little as 2 if we have enough creatures with counters out. Hamza makes our creature spells cost 1 mana less to cast for each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter. Lathiel can dish out these counters really fast and can spread them out among any number of creatures, so casting this will be easy and it's going to make our turns even more explosive. So the most important thing with this deck is triggering Lathiel's ability, and to do that we need to gain some life. We've got 29 cards in the deck that have some form of life gain. Ajani's Welcome, Prosperous Innkeeper, Soul Warden, and Tristani's Selesnya's Voice all gain us life when our creatures enter the battlefield. Ajani's Welcome will gain us 1 life for each creature that enters under our control. Prosperous Innkeeper has the same effect on a creature. We also get a treasure token when this creature enters, so this is a really good value at 2 mana. Soul Warden is a 1 mana creature that gains us 1 life when any creature enters the battlefield, so this also triggers for our opponent's creatures. This is not only nice for the extra life gain, but also the extra Lathiel triggers. Remember, Lathiel triggers at the end of each end step. So when Soul Warden is out with our commander, we're going to be getting a lot more +1/+1 counters on our creatures. Tristani only triggers for our creatures, but with this one we gain life equal to that creature's toughness. So in most cases we'll gain more than just 1 life for each creature that enters. We also have cards that gain us life when we play lands. These include Courser of Kruphix, Grazing Gladeheart, Jaddy Offshoot, and Druid class. Courser of Kruphix gains us 1 life when a land enters under our control. It also allows us to play lands off the top of our library, which will help us with card advantage. Grazing Gladeheart is going to gain us 2 life for each land we play instead of just 1. Jaddy Offshoot is a 0/3 defender that also gains us 1 life for each land we play. And then there's Druid class, which has the same effect, but we can also pay mana to level this enchantment up and gain additional effects. If we pay 3 mana, we can increase it to level 2 and we'll be able to play an additional land on our turns. Playing more lands means gaining more life, which is great. After that, we can pay 5 mana to get it to level 3. If we do that, we can turn one of our lands into a creature with power and toughness equal to the number of lands we control. I really like the design of this card. The leveling progression just feels very natural as each effect on this enchantment interacts with the last. Similar to the last group of cards is Shattered Angel. This creature actually gains us life whenever our opponents play lands. If this is out, we gain 3 life each time that happens. Not only is 3 life a considerable amount more than what we saw with the last 4 cards, but if we have 3 opponents that are all hitting their land drops, this is gaining us 9 life per rotation. And not only that, but if our commander is out, we're also distributing a total of 9 counters among creatures we control per rotation, not including our own turn. Lifelink is another option for gaining life. Healer's Hawk is a 1/1 bird with flying and lifelink for 1 white mana. This thing is really efficient for 1 mana. The likelihood that at least one of our opponents does not have anything to block this is pretty good, so it's almost a guaranteed instance of life gain on each of our turns. And we can beef it up with counters from Lathiel to gain even more life and get even more counters, which is what this deck is all about. Splendor Mare is a 3/3 with lifelink for 3. This is decent value on its own, but what makes it really great is the added versatility granted by its cycling ability. When we cycle this card for 2 mana, we get to put a lifelink counter on one of our creatures. So if we already have some creatures out, especially if one of them has a higher power or toughness, we can cycle Splendor Mare away to give that creature lifelink. Abzan Battle Priest is a creature that says each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it has lifelink. If we've had our commander out for a turn or 2, we're going to have plenty of creatures with counters, so this is going to gain us a bunch of life. Next up, we have a few instants that gain us life. Revitalize is a 2 mana instant that gains us 3 life and draws us a card. Congregate is a 4 mana instant that gains us 2 life for each creature on the battlefield. Now think back to the last 4-player game of Commander that you played. How many creatures are you seeing on the battlefield? In the groups I tend to play in, it's definitely not unusual to see 10 or more creatures out at any given time. To gain 20 life for 4 mana is a pretty good deal to me. This is one of those cards that has a low floor, but a ridiculously high ceiling, so it's definitely worth running. And then there's Beacon of Immortality, which doubles our life total for 6 mana. Don't be fooled by the wording on this card. Doubling our life total does count as gaining that much life. Trust me, I checked. Playing this in the late game is going to be ridiculous because if we've been having any amount of success, our life total should be higher than our starting life total. So if this spell resolves, our life total should be around 100 or more. By the way, the best time to cast any of these spells is going to be just before the end step prior to our turn. Why? Because Lathiel is going to trigger for our opponent's turn and allows us to get all those sweet, sweet counters, giving a substantial buff to our creatures right before our turn starts. When we untap, we'll have a board full of massive creatures ready to beat our opponents to a pulp. Speaking of massive creatures, we have Sunscorch Regent. This is a 4/4 flyer for 5 with an ability that says whenever an opponent casts a spell, we gain 1 life and put a +1/+1 counter on it. This thing is going to get huge if it can stick around for a while, and the life gain will often trigger on our opponent's turns, meaning extra counters for our creatures. And it'll be made even better if combined with Conclave Mentor. With this guy out, if we put one or more +1/+1 counters on a creature, we put that many +1 instead. So it's a budget-hardened scales that also gains us life when it dies. Next up is Oracle of Nectars. This guy is just a great mana sink, especially if we've run out of gas and we're needing something to do with that extra little bit of mana. We can activate this guy just before the end of our opponent's turn to gain a few extra life and pump up our creatures. And then we come to what's probably the best card in the deck, Spike Feeder. This creature enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Its first activated ability allows us to move one of its counters to another creature, but what we're really interested in is the second activated ability. We can remove a +1/+1 counter from Spike Feeder to gain 2 life. Why is this so good? Well, with our commander out, removing one counter from Spike Feeder means being able to give it 2 +1/+1 counters at the end step. Then on our next opponent's turn, we can remove the 2 +1/+1 counters to gain 4 life, meaning 4 more counters for Spike Feeder. See where this is going? For each turn that we do this, we're nearly doubling the number of counters on Spike Feeder. Eventually, we can take an opponent's turn to remove all or all but one of the counters from Spike Feeder to gain a bunch of life and use that life gain to generate loads of counters to spread amongst all of our creatures. Not only is this card incredibly powerful with our commander, but it's also a combo piece. Enchant Spike Feeder with Light of Promise, and we've got infinite life and a creature with power and toughness as high as we want. Light of Promise says that whenever you gain life, the enchanted creature gets that many +1/+1 counters. So if we remove one from Spike Feeder, we gain 2 life. Light of Promise says when that happens, we put 2 +1/+1 counters on that enchanted creature. So now Spike Feeder has 3 counters on it. We'll remove 2 of them to gain 4 life, giving it 4 counters. And we keep doing this on and on to our heart's content. Now hopefully we can either swing in unopposed with this or have a way to give this flying or trample so that we can kill someone. Either way, having infinite life is a good way to buy us some time until we can close the game out. Now with all that life gain, it might also be helpful to have some things that benefit from life gain in addition to our commander. Trelisara Moondancer is an example of this. Whenever we gain life, we put a +1/+1 counter on her and scry 1. With Nykthos Paragon, whenever we gain life, we put that many +1/+1 counters on each creature we control. Now this can only be done once per turn, but it does also trigger on our opponent's turns, so that's not too bad of a drawback. It's also a May ability, so if we're gearing up for one large instance of life gain on our turn, we can say no to each trigger until we get to that one that we really want to utilize. And the fact that this pumps up all of our creatures rather than just one is really good. In this deck, we also have life gain replacement effects, like on Cleric class. This replacement effect says if you would gain life, gain that much +1 instead. This works really well in tandem with those smaller triggers like on Soul Warden, effectively doubling the life gain output of that card. Cleric class also puts a +1/+1 counter on one of our creatures whenever we gain life if we get it to level 2. Level 3 gets us a creature back from our graveyard to the battlefield and gains us even more life. Angel of Vitality and Honor Troll also have the same replacement effect. Angel of Vitality gets +2/+2 as long as we have 25 or more life. We start the game with 40, so most of the time this will be a 4/4 with flying for 3. I see this as sort of a poor man's Serra Ascended. Honor Troll is very similar. This is still going to be a 4/4, but it'll have Vigilance instead of flying. Even better than these two, though, are Rock's Faithmender and Boon Reflection. Both of these cards are going to double the amount of life we gain. Rock's Faithmender is arguably better due to the fact that it costs 1 less and is a creature with lifelink. Getting one of these 2 creatures on the battlefield is going to allow us to spiral out of control fast. Now, even though that's a lot of life gain and a lot of counters, that still may not be enough to win us the game. What good is a 20/20 creature that can be chump blocked by an Elvish Mystic? Not good enough. That's why we have a few cards that are going to help us get around our opponent's creatures. Duskshell Crawler and Abzan Falconer are 2 such cards. Duskshell Crawler is a 2-mana creature that puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature when it enters. It also says all creatures we control with a +1/+1 counter have trample. So now our creatures with all those counters can trample through our opponent's smaller blockers. Abzan Falconer is very similar, but instead gives those creatures flying. This is going to make killing our opponents so much easier. Blossoming Bog Beast is another option for this. Whenever this creature attacks, we gain 2 life, and then all of our creatures get +X/+X and trample until end of turn, where X is the amount of life we've gained this turn. That number will be 2 at the very least, but will most likely be much, much more. Casting a big life gain spell like Congregate or Beacon of Immortality and then swinging in with the Bog Beast and the rest of our creatures will almost certainly win us the game. Moving on, let's talk about card draw. We're going to need ways to keep our hand full so we don't run out of gas. Dawn of Hope is a great way to draw an extra card here and there. Every time we gain life, we can pay 2 mana to draw a card. Similar to that is Well of Lost Dreams. However, the card draw potential on this card is much higher. Whenever we gain life, we can choose to pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life we gained. If we do, we draw X cards. As long as this card is on the battlefield, we'll have cards for days. Mindless Automaton is a card that makes use of all those +1/+1 counters. It only enters with 2 counters, but of course we can add more with Lathiel. Its second activated ability allows us to remove 2 counters from it to draw a card. These next 2 care about having +1/+1 counters on our creatures. Armorcraft Judge is a creature that draws us a card for each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Inspiring Call is an instant with the same effect. This card also gives those creatures indestructible until end of turn. This is a fantastic card to play in response to an opponent attempting to wipe our board. Shamanic Revelation and Camaraderie both draw us cards equal to the number of creatures we control. Shamanic Revelation will also gain us 4 life for each creature we control with power 4 or greater. Camaraderie also gains us life, but this one gains us an amount of life equal to the number of creatures we control. It also gives our creatures +1/+1 until end of turn, so this is best to play in our first main phase. Momentous Fall is an instant that is going to require us to sacrifice a creature. The payoff for this is great though, because we're going to draw cards equal to the power of the sacrificed creature, and we're also going to gain life equal to that creature's toughness. With our commander out, we'll get a bunch of counters from that life gain as well, so our board state should have the same amount of damage potential after casting this, even though we just sacrificed a creature. The last card draw card we have here is Return of the Wild Speaker. This is another instant that draws us cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures we control. But that's not all it can do. If we don't need the card draw or we're looking for a little extra damage to close the game out, we can choose to instead give our non-human creatures +3/+3 until end of turn. Moving on, let's touch on the removal in the deck. For targeted removal, our catch-all go-tos are going to be Banishing Light and Oblivion Ring. These 3-cost enchantments are going to exile any non-land permanent when they enter the battlefield. Inscription of Abundance is a great card that presents us with a few options. The reason this is in removal is because we can use this to have one of our creatures fight another creature. However, we can also use this to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature or gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. Invoke the Divine is a solid removal spell that can hit an artifact or enchantment at instant speed for 3 mana. It also gains us 4 life, which is a huge plus in this deck. Night of Autumn is another card that gives us options. For 3 mana, we get a 2/1 creature that can destroy an artifact or enchantment when it enters. If we don't need to do that, we can instead have it enter with 2 +1/+1 counters or gain 4 life. And then we have Hopeful Initiate. This is a 1/2 creature for 1 that has training. So we can potentially get counters on it from that, but we'll really want to add counters with Lathiel to make this really effective. The activated ability says that we can pay 3 mana and remove 2 +1/+1 counters from it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. As long as we're able to load this thing up with counters, we should be able to keep any threatening artifacts or enchantments off the battlefield. Now, we don't want to run too many board wipes in this deck since our deck relies on having a board state full of creatures, but we do want to have some access to that if we're really in trouble. Cleansing Nova is a 5 mana board wipe that gives us the option to destroy all creatures or destroy all artifacts or enchantments. I like this one a lot here because our board state is usually going to consist of a majority creatures, so oftentimes destroying all artifacts and enchantments is going to help us out quite a bit. But of course we also have the creature option if one or more of our opponents were able to outpace us. Fumigate is another option as a creature board wipe. This one is cool because we also gain 1 life for each creature destroyed. It's especially effective in the late game if we're able to play this and our commander and another creature or 2. If we have that much mana, we can blow everything up and then reset our board state and take advantage of Lathiel's ability all in one turn. Finally, we have Undo Inversion, which is a board wipe that destroys all non-land permanents. This also doubles as a land that taps for white and comes in tapped, which means it will never be a dead card in our hand. Now to close this thing out, let's go over our utility lands. We've got Blossoming Sands, Grey Pelt Refuge, and Radiant Fountain, which are all lands that gain us life when they enter. We want as many instances of life gain as we can possibly have, no matter how small, so these are a great way to squeeze a little more in there. Blighted Steppe can also gain us life. This taps for just colorless mana, but has an ability where we can pay 4 mana and sacrifice it to gain 2 life for each creature we control. Gingerbread Cabin enters untapped as long as we control 3 or more other forests. If it enters untapped, we get a food token, which we can sacrifice to gain 3 life. Another good one is Bredegard Stronghold. For 1 green and 2 white mana, we can sacrifice this land to give 2 creatures a +1/+1 counter and give them Vigilance and Lifelink until end of turn. This is a fantastic late game option for gaining more life. Lastly, we've got Salt Crusted Steppe, which is a storage land. With this, we can pay 1 and tap it to put a storage counter on it. If we end up being able to stack a few storage counters on this land, we can then pay 1 and remove any number of storage counters from it to add that much green and or white mana to our mana pool. This is a great way to make use of unused mana after our turn is over and help build us up for a more explosive play later on. So that's it. Let me know what you guys thought down in the comments below. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram using the handles in the description. And as always, thanks for getting your fix with me today. Stay safe out there. Peace out, guys.